everybody, it's Eric Poppenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day. And we're on the road once again, this time in Elmira, New York, at the home of Huckleberry Finn. That's right, because right behind me is Mark Twain's octagonal study, where he wrote all of his most famous books, including Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, A Connecticut Yankee, Prince and the Pauper, you name it. Now, we're here because we just came from a book sale in Corning, New York, didn't we, Kathy?
Yes.
And it was a wonderful bookstore. We may return to that later this afternoon, but we were only 10 minutes from this great literary landmark where we had never been before. So we wanted to bring you here to the study. Now, the story goes that Mark Twain's in-laws, who were from Elmira, New York, built this study for him where he could go and he could write during his summers while his wife was visiting with the family. There was also an ulterior motive because Mark Twain was a pipe smoker, and this kept all the smoking out of the house. But in this little study, he did some of his best writing, and it was moved from a farm not too far from here to the heart of Elmira College back in 1952. Now, Elmira College is important to me in part because my grandmother went here. But when she went here to the college, it was before the octagonal library was moved here. This is now also the home of the Institute of Mark Twain Studies, where people come, scholars from all over the world. Now, if you look inside, you can see that they have a whole row of reprint editions. But are reprint editions of Mark Twain good enough for us, Kathy?
No.
No, we want the real thing. So here in the box, I'll tell you this story first. We went to a local bookstore. There is one wonderful bookstore here in Elmira, New York. If you come visit, you'll have to pay them a visit. I said, I wonder if they have any Mark Twain first editions that have come in the door. And I walked in and said, do you have anything? And said, yes, just in, we have a first edition of The Prince and the Pauper. Obviously brought to them by somebody who loved Mark Twain. Now, this is one of my favorite books. I remember reading this as a kid, and this is Mark Twain's first adventure into historical fiction. Are you familiar with the plot of The Prince and the Pauper, Kathy?
Yes.
Well, we'll walk around so you can get a better angle of the study. He wrote this here in the study. It's about a prince and a pauper that gets sort of switched deliberately, and then the prince learns about the oppression of the lower classes, and eventually, when the prince becomes king, he becomes a better king because of that knowledge which he gains. Let me take you to the title page of this book. It's really attractive. The Prince and the Pauper, a tale for young people. So this is also Mark Twain's attempt at writing a book for children. Now, there are three interesting things about this book I want to draw your attention to. And the first is the publisher, Mr. James R. Osgood. Osgood originally started in the Boston firm of Ticknor and Fields, and he eventually helps found the firm, which is still around today, of Houghton Mifflin. He's an incredibly important publisher, and in 1882, when this book was published, he needed a hit. Do you know why he needed a hit?
Why is that?
Well, he had just taken a gamble and published a new edition of Walt Whitman's The Leaves of Grass.
Oh.
And this did not go over well with the Boston district attorney, who determined that it was obscene.
Wow.
And requested Osgood to redo all of Whitman's best poems, I Sing the Body Electric, etc., to remove the obscenities. Osgood wouldn't do that, and as a result, sold his electrotype plates to a different publisher, who then, with the controversy brewing, ended up selling out edition after edition after edition, just not in Boston. So Whitman was also pleased in the sense that the controversy just brought attention to the book. I'd say a modern lesson in why one should not attempt to ban books if one is trying to not make them popular. Nonetheless, Osgood didn't make as much money as he hoped off of that book. That came out in 1881, and as a result, had his friend, a man named Samuel Clemens, then writing under Mark Twain, write this book for children. And that's what he did. And it is a rather incredible book. The other thing which I find really interesting about this book, Kathy, is that it employed a young decorative artist. You'll see. Now, his name was Ludvig Ibsen, and he was Danish, and he produced chapter headings for each of the chapters. Each of the chapter headings has the type font and then a vignette in it. And it
So
goes
pretty.
all the way from the birth of the Prince and the Pauper all the way up, let's say, to the coronation, which is the final chapter. Aren't those nice?
Fabulous. They're
Now,
wonderful.
these decorative pieces remind me a lot of an English artist that we know by the name of Morse Smith, who did a lot of tile designs. But can you see the similarities?
Oh, yes.
It's the same period, the same time. Ibsen goes on to create some fonts of his own, and there are fonts. But this is really his first great decorative work. He is also known for doing a later illustrated version of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnets from the Portuguese. So that is Ibsen. And this book has illustrations within the text that are not by Ibsen, but made it very appealing to children, but it has these wonderful, wonderful decorative chapter headings. I also like about the book, I love the gilt cover, the green cloth. This precedes Huckleberry Finn, but it looks a little bit like the design for Huckleberry Finn, at least in terms of the color. And I will say one other thing about the book. It is a first edition, but it is not the first state. We talked about that a little bit when we talked about Huckleberry Finn. And that's because when it was first published by Osgood, they noticed a couple of typos, which they went in and corrected, misspelling, small little things that could be corrected on the electrotype plates. And then they reprinted it again and again and again and again quickly. So this is the first year of publication, considered the first edition, but with some corrections. And that is the exciting work, The Prince and the Pauper. You know, one of the things that really interests me in this study, Kathy, is that he had a beautiful fireplace, he had these lovely windows, he had the most incredible desk, and it's basically all window,
Yeah.
as you can see. And I can't think of a nicer place to write or to be inspired by the landscape. This is the landscape of central upstate New York. This is what inspired Mark Twain in his writings. And stick around because we're going to go back to that book sale and then go to a very special place on the Mark Twain Heritage Trail next. Well, we're now here at Woodlawn Cemetery in Elmira, New York, the final stop on today's Mark Twain Trail. Mark Twain is buried right behind me. Before we go to the grave, though, I wanted to show you a couple of the books that we got at the book sale in Corning. Corning, of course, is home for the famous glassworks, and this sale always has great books on glass. At the Scholar, we've got a wonderful decorative art section where you can find these books here. Lovely books on cameo glass, stained glass, glass blowing. They were blowing pumpkins for the holiday season. But we're here mainly because this is where Mark Twain lies buried. As we walk over to the grave, let me tell you a brief story about the sexton of the cemetery here, who was a man by the name of John Jones. He brought hundreds of enslaved people to freedom right here in Elmira. He had an arrangement with the local railroad that ran from Williamsport all the way up to Niagara Falls, where we just were. And in the baggage car, the enslaved folks that were looking for freedom were brought out, and eventually he helped smuggle them up to St. Catharines, Ontario, where we just were. So right along our route. Also, this cemetery has a claim to fame because thousands of Confederate soldiers are buried here because there was a prison camp during the Civil War, and John Jones personally buried each of those soldiers. But here we are at the grave of the great Mark Twain, of course, Samuel Langhorne Clemens being his real name, but both are on the tombstone, died here in April 1910. And he's buried next to his wife and his daughters, some of whom died before he did. He wrote the inscriptions, or chose the inscriptions on their tombstones. Now you'll note that the inscription on his wife's tombstone is in German, and that's important because today's funny book is something he would appreciate. It's German humor. Now, Mark Twain had sort of a love-hate relationship with the German language. He was famous for saying a German joke is not a laughing matter. He also said that it was easier for a rich man to get into heaven than it was for anyone to be able to read Old German font. He even said that some German words were so long that the words themselves had perspective. He would appreciate this book, German humor. And as you gaze upon the medallion for Mark Twain, let me say thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next Friday and every Friday for more adventures in the world of books.